Britain first at man's command.
Britain, in the second half of the 18th century, bestrode the globe. Enormously rich, enormously powerful. But what we failed to produce during this time was a national composer of real genius. We were, however, and continue to be, a nation of anthem lovers. We British naturally create songs that we can all wrap our lungs around, which tap into the public mood and somehow draw us together. Like it or loathe it, Rule Britannia has been a firm part of British national identity since the 1740s, the decade that also saw the birth of our other big national tune. So, two iconic tunes, but no great national composer. And once again, the man that became our national musical hero at the end of the 18th century was, like Handel before him, a foreigner. He came from Austria, and his name was Franz Joseph Haydn. And he wrote this. The Austrian imperial anthem, subsequently adopted by the Germans. Let's face it, they got the better tune. But Britain's relationship with Haydn really was a two-way street. We caused a seismic shift in his composition, and he took our musical destiny forwards. Haydn arrived in Britain on New Year's Day 1791, the first of two substantial visits he made here. He was already revered internationally as the world's greatest composer, and yet he'd spent his entire working life closeted away in the service of noble princes on the Hungarian border. And only now, at the age of nearly 60, did he have the opportunity to travel independently. The world was his oyster, but it was Britain he chose to come to. In 1791, this country was more progressive, open, free and rich than any other in Europe. And interestingly, economic, political and cultural power was in the process of shifting from the aristocracy and the church to the new, confident and swelling middle class. It's really important to realise that Haydn was massively popular in Britain long before he'd even come here. We knew him through his scores, through his symphonies and his quartets, which were being endlessly performed around the country. This is an age, of course, before recording, so it wasn't like Haydn's discs were travelling, it was his scores that were travelling, and we were loving them. Now, as a conductor, I'm endlessly being confronted by new music, and I so clearly remember the day, about 15 years ago, when I finally, suddenly got hold of the Farewell Symphony, Haydn Symphony number 45. And do you know what? I opened the first page of this score. It's in F sharp minor, by the way, which is a really prickly, dodgy key, a key that was very rarely used by composers of this era because of its instability. I opened the page and it just jumped out at me, practically grabbed my throat off. It's so powerful. It starts with this stunningly strong set of chords thundering down and then back up again, and then goes to something abjectly soft. Haydn had a tremendous sense of theatre. He was a great teller of stories, and we British have always loved that. So I suppose the key to this music, why we loved it so much, is this sense of drama, of storytelling. Also this tremendous sense of forward motion. There's something immensely optimistic about that. The earth elemental power of the rhythmic drive, even though the outer kind of tenor of the music, it's a minor key, is quite sombre. Late 18th century Britain had an insatiable appetite for thrilling, spectacular entertainment. Fortunes were being made and lost in enterprises such as extravagant masquerade balls, the famous Oxford Street Pantheon, which functioned as a kind of winter pleasure gardens, and the mind-blowing novelty of Robert Barker's Rotunda, which opened just here in 1793 on the corner of Cranbourne Street and Leicester Square, and which for 5 shillings offered the public the Georgian equivalent of the IMAX cinema. A gigantic 360-degree view of exotic cities like Constantinople, stirring patriotic scenes from the British fleet, or battles from the Napoleonic Wars. Now, just a couple of years before Robert Barker opened his Rotunda, a violinist and impresario by the name of Johann Peter Salomon determined that Haydn's name should be up there in lights, so to speak, in Britain's capital.
Marshall Marcus is the nearest modern equivalent to Salomon. Formerly a violinist, a self-confessed Haydn nut, he's now head of music at London's South Bank Centre.
Huge coup, wasn't it, for London to get Haydn?
It was, and it's one of those things that rest on almost like an accident, that Salomon, impresario who worked in London, happened to be travelling around in Europe. He was in Cologne when he heard the news that the prince who'd employed Haydn was dead, and he went straight to Vienna. I mean, it was one of those moments where you just got to do it. You know, he thought, yeah, there's the opportunity. He went to Vienna, he went to see Haydn, and he said, Haydn, you're coming with me to London. And they sort of made this accord, as he put it, and he brought them here. And it was just, you know, an extraordinary opportunity. We all look for those.
Why do you think London was so attractive to Haydn?
Well, this is the world's table at that point. Everything is going on here. So it was an extraordinary magnet for musicians. It's been that for hundreds of years, and it continues today to be that. And huge potential for earning. I mean, the contract that was done with him, he got £200 for a commission to write 6 symphonies and £200 more for the copyright there, £250 for a benefit. I think I estimated that he was offered in the region of £1,200, which was a massive sum in those days. London was the centre of what was important. Music was the rage, Haydn was the man, London was the place.
London hit Haydn like a sledgehammer. It was the busiest, the noisiest, the dirtiest, the most industrialised city on the planet. Now, Haydn made sense of it by trying to understand it, compulsively collecting data. Like this, for instance, he wrote, "The City of London consumes 8 times 100,000 cartloads of coal each year. Each cart holds 30. In the month of January 1792, a roasting chicken costs 7 shillings, a turkey 9 shillings, a dozen larks 1. The national debt of England is estimated to be over 200 million. The City of London keeps 4,000 carts for an apprentice generally works the whole year round from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening, and during this time he is paid by the piece, but every quarter of an hour of absence is docked. NB, a duck, if it's plucked, costs 5 shillings. Cool and clinical collections of information. This is how Haydn's mind works, his sense of London, his sense of industrialisation. So what does it tell us about the man, and in particular, his music? Look, of course he's interested in the poetical, but he's most interested in form and structure.
He's already perfected his art by the 1760s, 70s, decades before he's come to London. And now he's just going to go and enjoy himself. I mean, let's take the 71 number 2, the String Quartet, that first movement, and you've got this very slow opening. It sounds very portentous, very serious. And then immediately after a few bars, he just punctures that. And he starts what you wouldn't even call as a tune, really. It's sort of this jumping figure. Bum, 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 bum. And then you think, okay, now what's he going to do with it? And of course he does all sorts of things with it. He puts it upside down, he covers it in as an accompaniment, he makes the harmony go into some bizarre places. And it's so interesting that many composers go into a sort of late phase when it all gets very, very serious. But Haydn just has a technique that allows him to go to the edge and come back. The number of times you get to a point you think, oh God, now it's getting serious, and you expect a sort of Beethoven crisis. And he says, no, no, just joking, and he moves on.
This is where he's such a scientist, that he's got the same kind of zealous need to discover all the which ways that one might treat or work a piece of music, a thread, just as an alchemist might in a laboratory.
I think that's absolutely right. That's exactly how I see Haydn. He's one of those people who is forever looking at the structure of the world and saying, okay, what happens if we turn that upside down that, or that way round? And I just think it's that constant curiosity. His tunes are not the things that will catch you, it's the form, it's the structure. I was once talking to a musician who said to me, you know, the thing about Haydn is the structure is the expression. And I think that was one of the most profound things I've heard about him.
But Haydn was here to deliver. He needed to make an impact with that structure and form. Early George in London had got its greatest thrills from the dramatic narrative spectacular of opera. But the public of the 1790s was about to be ravished by the entirely abstract musical spectacle of the symphony. And over the next 4 years, Haydn, fondly dubbed the father of the symphony, was to write a dozen of them, those that we now know as the London Symphonies. Together, they represent not only the real crown jewels of his output, but also his single greatest public achievement in this country. And of all of them, the one that the British public most completely wowed to was his Symphony No. 100, the military.
In March 1791, Salomon launched Haydn onto the London scene with a 12-week series of subscription concerts in the Hanover Square Rooms, which were sadly destroyed in 1900. So, for this film, we're performing in the closest match you can find, the Assembly Rooms in Bath, with my orchestra of period instruments, Army of Generals.
These were high-prestige, fashionable events, and they were expensive. 5 guineas or so for 12 concerts was typical for a series like that, and that's a lot of money. London audiences made their presence felt, whether it was through ecstatic applause, even during the middle of a piece. But if the music didn't take their fancy, they would engage in conversation and go off to the refreshment rooms. The composer had to really work hard to attract the attention of his audiences.
The demanding British public presented a distinct new challenge for Haydn. He's now effectively a commercial composer. And like the best showman, he's got to grab the attention of his paying audience from the very start.